happy to have you joining us. I'm Jane Lano, and we're all members of the Society of Communications Technology Consultants. Each one of us has many years of experience working with a variety of organizations. And we each work for a separate business and approach communications technology expense management in different ways. So you'll probably hear some different opinions. What we're hoping to give you in the next half hour are both questions to ask and some things you need to think about to help you to reset your communications expense strategy as we come out of the pandemic, fingers crossed, and adapt to a changing work environment. Please enter your questions in the chat window and we'll try to address each of them. We also have a handout for you called Communications Technology Expense Management for Smart People, which we will email to you or send a spiral-bound hard copy. And this is a compilation of short articles published by our members. So if you'd like a copy, please enter your email address in the chat window or send me an email at jane.lano@digby4.com. And we'll put that in the chat too. And say if you want this to be emailed or a hard copy. Sure to be a collector's item. First up is my colleague, Denise Monroe of CRG Telecom. And Denise will help you to think about sorting through your legacy services, which is a fancy way of saying services that your communications service provider no longer wants to provide. Denise?
Yeah, hi, thank you, Jane. Great to be here. I'd like to just say a little bit about the work I do with CRG. I'm a communications technology consultant, and I've been doing this kind of work for more years than I'd like to admit, but I have seen this industry go through many changes and iterations over time. So this is just another one of them. And I think that all of us are living in a changing environment, and knowing what we have actually will improve our vision going forward. Next slide, please. So what we're seeing a lot of in this industry over the last, I'd say 2 to 3 years, is that many carriers are sunsetting or decommissioning their copper-based TDM networks. And what does this mean to you? This means anything that is delivered to you on copper services, whether it be a POTS line or a low-speed data circuit or a PRI, is on a copper-based service. That means their infrastructure is all cable wires instead of what the newer, easier to maintain networks are, which are fiber. So these copper-based networks are the oldest infrastructure in carrier networks. And parts are becoming harder and harder to get as time goes on because they're just not manufactured anymore. And you know, that guy in the truck, the technicians that have supported these services are actually retiring, that they've been in this business so long, it's time for them to go on to greener pastures. And then the cost based on these items, the cost of supporting these legacy networks are increasing. So that also increases the cost to provide that support from the carrier's perspective. And so as a result, they're decommissioning their copper network and installing and planning to install fiber services, which are easier to maintain. Next slide, please. Well, how are carriers responding to this? First of all, I'd like to say that carriers have made some significant investments in installing fiber facilities over the last probably 5 years. You see new announcements of this as every week. So what carriers are trying to do is kind of coax you into moving away from the older services that you might have in exchange for a newer fiber-based service. And how they're doing this is a number of ways. They're not allowing you to re-up or renew contracts that you have for those older services. So if you have a PRI that's provided by copper, many carriers are opting to not let you renew those contracts and trying to encourage you to go to, you know, an IP type of service, SIP trunks or whatever the case might be. And what I've seen in many cases is they're giving very minimal notice that they're going to end the support of these services. Now you can keep the services, but you'll probably pay a higher rate and you will no longer be able to get support for those services from your carrier. I've seen notice as little as 45 to 90 days that this is happening. And then we, like I mentioned just before this, is that they're increasing your prices in order to hopefully get you to move in that direction. I've seen instances where POTS lines, which are the copper paste voice grade circuits services, have increased from $30 to $55 a month, all the way to $400 a month. And there's not really any notice given that these prices are going to increase. I have a client right now who's using a 9.6 kilobit data circuit that he's still using it in his network, but that price has increased to $1,500 a month. So as you can see, those are just a couple of examples about how carriers are trying to urge you or encourage you to move in the direction of making this change. Next slide, please. So what is you as a user, what can you do to respond to the sunsetting of these services? Essentially, you're either going to get notification, maybe in a bill insert or maybe an email or something like that from your carrier that you may be impacted. I've seen it impacted regionally. I've seen it announcements made by carrier, by region, and by even the type of service. So what can you do as a user to respond to this? First of all, do what you can to identify services that you currently have under contract that might be impacted by this. PRIs, data circuits, older data circuits, and PRIs are easy services to look at first. Identify if the services are being used. I have found more often than not, a lot of these legacy services may not even be used anymore, but it would be a good exercise to go through to identify if these services are even being used. If you need the service, look at other alternatives that may be fiber-based. For example, my client that has the 9.6 kilobit circuit, and he is still using it, may opt for a fiber broadband connection instead and save a significant amount of money. Another thing you can do is create a transition plan for your copper services. Another client of mine is building in their own fiber infrastructure on their campuses. And so what they're doing is they're looking at ways they can then transfer or transition their copper-based services to their own fiber networks. And then work with your vendors on the transition plan. And sometimes your account team doesn't even know it's coming down the pike, but if you're proactive about it, it may make a big difference in having your services change to your fiber-based solutions without a huge hit in price and the other items, the short timeframes and so forth that I've discussed. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Denise. Very helpful and very real. We're all seeing exactly what Denise has been talking about. So encourage everyone to pay attention. Okay, next up we have Gary Lisbon of GL Voice Solutions, and I'll bet you can't guess what the GL stands for. So Gary's going to talk to us about how to conduct a holistic audit, right down to some nitty-gritty details about your cabling infrastructure that you'll need to know if there's any downsizing or relocation in your reset plans. Gary?
Thank you, Jane. I appreciate that. And GL Voice, it stands for Glass, Light, and Voice, which is what you need to have voice over your fiber optics. Next slide, please.
Thanks for explaining that, Gary.
No problem. We're going to talk today about how to conduct a holistic audit. It's considered an audit after the internal audit has been conducted. Everything that is going to cost you money in order to have the savings happen at the end. Next slide, please. Current infrastructure. Cabling like type 3, cat 5, and cat 6, or do you have something else? A lot of times cat 3 cable, due to fiber codes across the country, needs to be completely removed from your system, from your buildings whatsoever. It's a fire hazard, creates a lot of smoke and hazardous chemicals in the air. Cat 5 small e is basically cat 3. There's a typo here where cat 5 should be large e, which is suitable for IP. It's very confusing. 5e is small, is no good. Cat 5 large e is suitable. Just make sure we're using 8 conductor jacks versus 6 conductor jacks. The old analog devices will use 6 conductor jacks, and it's going to all have to be replaced. So we're going to have to get through and rejack all the cubicles. The back room probably has to have patch panels and jacks replaced completely. Cat 6 and above are preferred for all IP devices. DMARC extensions need to be at least a Cat 6 or higher, or maybe you're going to have to run a new fiber run to support that new bandwidth that Denise was talking about as well. Now, large facilities like warehouses, hospitals may need to install IDFs where before you didn't need that. IP devices are typically good for about 300 feet. Analog devices and digital phones will go over 1,200 feet. So as you can see, you may need to add 3 or 4 different areas of IDFs to create a good, solid communications platform. Next slide, please. Your IT room, if required, can it hold the additional equipment such as racks, switches, routers, patch panels, battery backup, power strips, etc. There's a lot more stress in the IT room now than there ever was before. A lot of times before, the old communications phone system was on a wall outside in a warehouse. Now it's going to be moved in, sitting side by side your data network and your security network as well. So there's a consideration for a lot more rooms needed. Make sure that you bring an electrician, and make sure these electrical outlets are checked, verified that they are dedicated and the racks are properly grounded. That's a big miss at a lot of places I've gone and seen over my 35 years. Cooling and heating are also a must. Hot equipment means a shorter life. A dirty environment in a warehouse or outside in a garage will shorten your equipment's life and may lead to a quickly unexpected downtime. Next slide, please. Cost of new equipment and software. Account for racks, switches, patch panels, patch cords. If you're installing Cat 6, then you need to install Cat 6 termination points and cabling and patch cords, jacks as well. So it's end to end, or you will, once you put a Cat 5 or a Cat 3 on the end of this, you're not going to get anywhere near the speed that you're going to need to run this stuff properly. Consider the cost of the physical phones, licenses, software, headsets, storage for recordings. Are you going to do it on in-house, or are you going to go to a data center and you're going to buy more space that way? Dashboards for your call center upgrades are all things to take into consideration as well. Consider that monthly expense for your new service, whether cloud, hosted, or another premise system. I mean, at that point, it's taken over your phone bill. Your phone bill is going to become a hosted or cloud environment bill. It's going to show you a lot of different billing for your licenses, monthly recurring costs. May or may not see the local usage and long distance usage on it or not. Sometimes they're entwined and unlimited. Next slide, please. How about the unforeseen costs for additional labor? During your normal business hours, you pay normal rates. If you can do it after hours, you're going to be considering time and a half. Don't forget to consider drive time. Are you going to be charged that for every tech? Or are you going to get a charge at once? Or are they going to come back 2 or 3 times? Those charges can be hundreds of dollars alone on your new invoice just to get the new service up. Another important aspect I want to talk to you about today is, when are you planning on porting your numbers? Now that you've had everything else kind of laid out, we recommend porting during the workday between 3 and 5 p.m. to get it started. This way, if you run into any kind of problems, invoice is incorrect, the name's wrong, an invoice needs to be paid, the CSR is wrong, you're going to need the back office and the billing office from the old carrier to get this straight before they go and allow you to port your phone numbers. It can really throw a wrench into you if you do after hours or over the weekend. You're going to end up with a B team, and you're not going to be able to do anything until that next business day comes around. So that can be troublesome. Project management. Are you going to do all this, or you need to consider the cost of your IT and your support time as well? Their time is valuable. Do you guys have the resources to go and pull this off? Or do you want to outsource the project, or is it a combination? Is the provider going to do everything for you for free? Is it really free or just baked into your new contract? That monthly invoice is going to keep going forever. It's never going to stop. Just keep repaying as reoccurring cost. Are you going to hire a sales consultant? Or did you hire a sales consultant who works for a service provider? Well, they may be making money on you and the carrier on the backside. Instead, hire one of us, a SCTC consultant. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Gary. That was terrific. My head is spinning just thinking about it all. But
There's a lot to
really,
consider, Jane.
really great way to lay it out. Okay, so thank you. Next, we have Greg Pittman of Pittman and Associates, and Greg's going to talk to us about how to find the hidden costs of a remote workforce, which most of us have right now. Greg?
Hi, thanks. I'm Greg Pittman with Pittman and Associates, and I have, like the others, many years of experience in telecom. And in the next 4 slides, I'll be discussing how to find some hidden costs in your telecom, specifically in wireless services, cloud services, plus an on-premises area to consider, security risks to think about, and some administrative and operational areas. Wireless is a large part, as you know, of most organizations' communications budget. As remote work became more commonplace after COVID-19, staff cell phone usage changed. In some cases, cell phones began to be used for voice calls that used to be made by the traditional office phone system before COVID. This does not necessarily mean a high impact, as most cell phone plans, include unlimited voice and text messaging. But wireless data is a completely other consideration. We have clients whose data usage has risen dramatically with work from home users, as you can see in the graph. You're probably aware that 1 hour of a video call, regardless of the platform, consumes almost 1.7 gigabytes of data per hour. So at 3 calls per day for 20 business days, that's 102 gigabytes of data used per month. If you don't have the proper data plans and pooling in place, this can be a huge cost increase. What we found is that often the staff use the cell phone data for convenience, and other times it's more of a bandwidth situation. Maybe they're competing with other work from home or work from anywhere users in the home, or maybe there's a remote learning student situation. On the next slide, we'll see 2 aspects of cloud services to watch for hidden costs, specifically licensing and cloud inefficiencies. Your organization could be in a situation where the shadow IT process grows as users find their own cloud services and subscribe individually. Or they start with a free version that transitions to paid. In these cases, the enterprise level volume licensing agreements that you worked hard to get leverage with are missed and the costs really rise. Also, some legacy systems don't lend themselves to remote access. You could have upgrades required as part of these systems, both at the user end and at the system end. So you need to be aware of your user's equipment as well, like Gary was talking about, and check to see whether it meets the requirements for running your cloud systems. Then from both the cloud and premises-based perspective, you should look at the capacity levels of service, the data bandwidth, voice trunks at both headquarters and branch locations, and try to figure out, can it be right-sized now that fewer staff are working in the office? There are some temporary changes you can make to some services, which may help until a final decision is made on the size of your various work locations. The next slide talks about security risks that increase with more staff working remotely. Let's look at remote contact center agents. They may not have the best or most compliant workspaces in their home that meet PCI requirements. How private is their area? Can the information on their screen be viewed by unauthorized people? Users working remotely have been known, believe it or not, to not follow corporate policies. One example could be mixing personal and corporate use on their laptops. Email phishing is really increasing. In fact, Google reports that they have registered more than 2 million phishing websites between January and November of 2020. And that was a nearly 20% increase over 2019. So there's a lot of opportunity for your users to get into trouble and to get your company in trouble with security. With the next slide, let's look at administrative and other operational issues. And let's start with the new 911 requirements, Kerry's Law and Ray Baum's Act. If you're not familiar with that, Kerry's Law deals with direct access to 911 and providing on-site notification when 911 is called. Then the Ray Baum's Act deals primarily with providing a dispatchable location. So how are these being met for your remote workers? Does the organization even know where their workers are now based? I've heard of users taking the work from anywhere opportunity to the extreme, temporarily relocating to new locations just because they could. I've talked to friends of mine whose millennial kids have moved to temporarily Hawaii and San Diego and upstate New York, just anywhere they could, just because they wanted to, right? So does the organization even know where they are? So think about, do you need to replace or upgrade or maybe even add a new 911 communication system for your users? Then think about the process for paying bills. Who needs to handle and see these bills in order to get them the invoices paid? If certain staff are no longer coming into the office, how are paper bills being handled? And then more of an accounting or payroll issue, there could be issues with workers working remote from locations or states where they were not based before. So it's something to think about or talk to the accounting department to have them think about. And then IT equipment. Are upgrades required for remote work? Do you need to replace some equipment? What about duplicating equipment? And we're talking about, like Gary said, headsets, monitors, printers, chairs even, right? You need to think about that. So having a remote workforce requires reviewing all the logistics of how work is done in an organization. And if you're not careful, you may end up with a busted budget. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Greg. That was terrific. And those of you who are listening, you'll start to see some recurring themes here. Now, I'm up next, and my topic is resetting your communications budget post-pandemic. And again, I'm Jane Leno with Dig4 Group. So in March 2020, we all remember that month, COVID-19 arrived so quickly that organizations just went into a reactive mode to continue operating. So while people were working from home, the ability to keep things running smoothly was really of greater concern than the associated costs. No one asked a lot of questions about what's this going to cost, just make it work. And since many people are still working from home, this is a good time to step back, look at expenses, and anticipate which new ones will appear. Now, how to do this depends upon which changes you made in the first place and what your organization will look like in the future, as far as we can tell. A good starting point is to be sure you have all of your bills on all of your contracts for all of your fixed, mobile, and cloud communications, and ideally a good inventory as well. I have to say, most people don't have that, but and knowing exactly what you're paying for really is key. So if you don't have it, it's a good time to put it together. And what I'm going to give you here are just a few questions to ask to get you started. And in the article I wrote that's in our handout, there'll be more of these type of questions. The first one is some questions on mobile services. Did we provide and pay for mobile devices and services to employees who didn't previously have them? And if so, do we have a record of these and the associated costs? Do we plan to take away or downgrade the mobile service once employees return to the office? Good luck with that. Once people get used to things, they don't want to give them up. And did we adjust our mobile plans to accommodate the increased use for voice data, text messaging, mobile-to-mobile video? And what are the costs that we incurred? And can we adjust these when the employees are back in the office and using the office communication system? Video conference service, well, has this taken off? And what are we paying for these services like Zoom, Teams, WebEx, BlueJeans, GoToMeeting? And what have we contractually agreed to? And Robert Harris is going to talk more about this at the end of our presentation. Very enlightening, lots to learn. If we're paying for a total number of licenses, how many people are using this service? Is there a usage-based approach to paying that may lower the expense? And what are the costs associated with people dialing into the video conferences for audio? This surprised me because we're seeing a lot of this. Many people don't have a good enough Wi-Fi connection, so they go into the video part with Wi-Fi, but then they dial in with audio, not realizing that they're being charged a cost per minute for that, which can really add up. And also, I'm repeating myself here, so we'll move on to the next. Connectivity to your organization's data network. What new costs did you incur while enabling your remote users to access the organization's data network? Did the bandwidth capacity at their homes have to increase? I know many people in the financial services business definitely had to increase the capacity for working from home. Were security measures implemented that resulted in additional costs? Was equipment purchased or leased for employees at home, or were they using their own equipment? And what was the impact on your network in terms of use? Did the costs go up? And if so, will these costs lessen when workers return to the office? And lastly, connectivity to your organization's voice network. How did calls to your office-based or cloud-based telephone numbers reach employees at home? Were the calls forwarded? And if so, what was the total cost? If you forwarded calls to mobile phones, there might be a cost both from the fixed line provider and the mobile provider, kind of double paying for calls. And how did your employees make outgoing calls? Did they go through the office-based system? And if so, did the call volumes change and therefore the costs change from when people were in the office? So these are just some questions to ask. And the last point I want to make is, since it wasn't clear how long working from home was going to last, most organizations didn't make any cost-saving adjustments to their office-based communication system, both for services and for equipment. I've seen it. Everyone was afraid because who knows why cut back when people might be coming back to the office soon, but soon it keeps changing and it keeps getting moved out. And it just follows, if you reduce the number of people in the office at any given time, you're likely paying for more capacity than is required for both the services and equipment. So figuring all this out is no easy task. A good place to start is to ensure that you have a complete inventory of all the services, all the equipment, whether it's in your office or at your employees' homes, if you're paying for it. Document the monthly costs, the contractual obligations, and then make some decisions about what costs you can eliminate, what you're unsure about. I'm sure there will be a lot of that, and what needs to stay. And keeping all this detail up to date is really important to help you to make good decisions moving forward. So next we have, as I mentioned, Robert Harris of auditthecloud.com. And Robert is going to talk about aligning your carrier, cloud, and equipment contracts with a flexible hybrid work plan. Robert?
Well, thank you, Jane. And as you know, I think we can all agree, we get to see a lot of different types of contracts. We see them from telco vendors, for on-premise equipment, and even for cloud services. And they all have one thing in common that gets in the way of what my title is here, which is a flexible hybrid work plan. And if we go to the next slide, we can see what that is. It's that vendors don't want to be flexible. And if we look back for the years we've been doing what started as telecom consulting, we would negotiate flexibility in our carrier services. And I'd say the best practice for an enterprise used to be, don't commit more than 80% of your spend. So if you were going to spend 100,000, only commit 80,000. Then you have some room for business downturns and you're still getting a discount. In this new hybrid world, you really want to go even lower than that. If you know your price, and one of the things you need to know about that is that your pricing actually won't make that much of a difference on the final cost. I know this because sometimes small and medium-sized businesses will get the same rates as a large enterprise for telco services. Why is that? Why would that happen? It's because they're more nimble and they have a greater ability to walk away from what's no longer a good deal and a competitive rate. I've worked on large scale commitments where cutting the commitment in half, 50% of what they were committing to spending before, cost the customer less than 3% of their overall savings. So it's definitely worth it to save a little bit less on your discount, but just to have that flexibility. Now, the second part of this is cloud services, and that can be unified communications, but it can also include software subscriptions and all kinds of cloud platforms. If you remember, one of the selling points of cloud services was supposed to be flexibility. You can just turn it on and off as you do, just like your electrical bill. And it's a great thing that you can scale without investing in a whole room full of data equipment. But the problem is that this creates a problem for the cloud vendors. Cloud services have a really high churn rate. That means that people do turn them on and off as they want to, and they decide they're tired of one service and they switch to another. Meanwhile, the value to the vendor is in the recurring revenue. It doesn't matter if they sign up someone for a month or two, especially if it's at some trial rate or at some discount rate. It's much easier for customers to leave. So because of this, most contracts by design are guaranteeing a large percentage of revenue and are designed to be very sticky, to have services that are fixed in place. If we go to the next slide, we can talk about what Jane already mentioned, and that's that work plans are still in flux. When the pandemic first started, all of the cloud vendors, most of you out there probably remember this, were letting companies use services for free. It was going to be a few months, and we're going to extend free video, we're going to extend free VPN licenses, we're going to extend free mobility, you name it. But at some point, they needed to start making money. If you look at my bullet points, I apologize because I know this looks like I'm just stating the obvious, like that old investment joke, you know, where they say buy low and sell high. But here's how you can give the vendors the revenue assurance that they need, because they do need to make money, while you can still preserve the flexibility that you need. So the first is to not get locked into free or trial services. Make a decision based on the services you need, not on what somebody is giving you for free, even if it's an existing incumbent vendor. But most importantly, don't get locked into product-specific commitments. This means that you're committing to a specific type of license rather than just a specific amount of revenue within a service. Vendors want to ensure that they get a certain amount of revenue, that they make money for the discount that they're giving you, and that's fair enough. But that does not mean that it needs to be the same products next year that you're using this year. Maybe next year, Office Video or some new advanced video add-on will be more important than remote office mobility is this time. So favor revenue commitments versus quantity commitments. If you see somebody who's making you sign an agreement for a certain amount of seats for a certain type of service, don't sign it. Make it, how about I just agree that I'll pay you $80,000 a month or whatever the amount happens to be. The last thing is to reconsider your service level agreements or SLAs for your on-site equipment. Just like Jane said, you have equipment that's just sitting there, but even on top of that, suppose you decide that you do need to keep it and people are going to move back into the office. Do you really need 24/7 coverage with a 2-hour on-site response time anymore? Now you might, but if everybody could just pack up and work at home, and we all did this before, we packed up and worked at home, and we're still in business because you're still here watching this presentation. Maybe you don't need that stringent SLA anymore. Maybe your service levels that used to be part of your business continuity plan are being replaced by the fact that you have to have a hybrid work environment. Let's look at the next slide. This is talking a little bit about the two different approaches to negotiating services. The first is if you have a single vendor. Some companies like to invest in a single vendor. They say one throat to choke. I always say, why? How about no throats to choke? But now I'm getting off on a tangent. But really, leverage larger revenue commitments if you have a single vendor. You say, basically, we're your loyal customer. We're committing all of this services, and we want savings and flexibility because of it. We want to be able to switch between all of your products. We want flexible clauses in our master contract. We don't want to be stuck using this exact product for the next 3 years. This is great. And if you are buying a lot from one vendor, you can make sure you get rewarded for it. The second is if you have a best of breed environment. This is where you have different vendors for all, you might have a different vendor for video from telephony, for example. You might have a different vendor for your collaboration or your office suite but you're not using Teams for your telephony, all kinds of different examples. You're not spending as much with a single vendor, but you know what you do have that the single vendor people don't have? You have created a competitive incentive for your terms and pricing. by not having so much loyalty, you actually have leverage in a different way. If, like I said, if you have a single vendor, you have leverage because you're a valued business partner. But if you're using best of breed, you also have leverage because you can leverage competing suppliers for savings and flexibility. And if you do this, it's true that some spend may not be enough to leverage for good pricing. You know, maybe you have a couple of, I think a good example is like some cloud graphic art program or something that you only have a few seats. You have a few niche solutions that don't cost that much. That's okay, because you still have flexibility and it will still help you to be successful in a hybrid work environment with the overall environment. I'm going to end with one point. It's not on this slide, but it's really important. And that's that you never think that you're stuck. I talk to so many customers and they say, oh, well, we just signed a new contract, so there's nothing we can do. And, you know, I found if you think you're stuck in a commitment, that there's always a way to gain leverage. I call it through either carrots or coercion. If you don't like carrots, it's not a good example, because carrots are something that appeals to the vendor or to give you better terms and prices. And now this could be additional spend, or maybe a new product they have, or even just a renewed commitment. So there are always ways to make it attractive for the vendor to give you back the flexibility, even if you're early in a contract. I've never seen the case where they won't entertain reasonable offers. Coercion is for when they won't entertain reasonable offers. And coercion is really communicating a consequence to a vendor for unreasonable terms. Now, vendors want their customers to be happy. And they don't want to just keep you for the 36-month contract period or whatever's left on it. They want a loyal customer. So really, if you make it clear that you're willing to start looking at other options, or even start moving some of the services that don't have as tight a commitment, that will get their attention, and they'll start giving you the flexibility you need for a hybrid work environment. That's all I have, Jane. So thanks, and I'll put it back to you.
Okay, thanks, Robert. Great stuff. I'm learning a lot from Robert. Actually, I learn a lot from everyone, and that's what I said in the beginning. We all come at these things differently, and it's a great group that we have here. And so I was just going to suggest to Denise, maybe you could put the SCTC website in the chat. I don't think we have it up here. And if anyone's interested in talking to us, even just for fun, you can reach each one of us on the SCTC website. So we have a few minutes left, not as many as we thought we would, but about 7.5 minutes. So Denise, do we have any questions in the chat?
I don't have any specific questions just now. I did put Jane's email address in the chat window in the event that you would like to get a copy of our booklet. Jane, what was the name of the booklet? I didn't catch that.
Well, I named it Communications Technology Expense Management for Smart People.
All right. So
get it? Like instead of for dummies, for smart people. Yeah, really clever, right? But anyway, for smart people, don't know everything about everything. And we've got a lot of collective knowledge here. And it's something that articles we've all written. They're all very timely. And so I called it a booklet, but it's getting a little longer than a booklet. So you can have an electronic copy emailed to you, or if you prefer a hard copy, just say so with your email and I'll get in touch with you to get your address. Anybody else want to have some closing comments? I think, we're at a big pivotal time here. So not sure who all is listening, but I wish you success with your figuring out of what you need to do next with your communications technology expenses, which is getting more complex all the time.
I do think that Greg had mentioned kids moving to work in San Diego, and it reminded me that if you do have kids that have moved to work in San Diego and you want an excuse to go visit them, the SCTC is having a conference in San Diego from November 1st to November 4th. So we will all be live as long as we're allowed to. Right now, things are looking good. It should be a fun conference with a lot of different subjects, and you can get information about that on the conferences tab on that same website that Denise put into the chat.
Yes, and something else to comment about is many of us on this panel do write articles for No Jitter and Workspace Connect. And a lot of this content is expounded on in some of those articles. So if you are interested in learning more about this, you can definitely search us on No Jitter and Workspace Connect. And I believe that some of those articles are going to be included in our Smart People book.
I see we got some good comments too. So thank you,
Yes.
Roberta and David, for saying we did a good job. We did our best and we really enjoyed it. So thank you, panel. And I guess we're sign off, over and out, and hope everyone has a good rest of the day.
Thank you so much, guys.
Okay.
Thanks for being here.
Bye.